In this video, I'm going to go through the solutions for the isometric orthogonal task 4. And I want to talk about a couple of things to think about when you're, and I'll go through task 5 as well in this video. This is for year 11 or preliminary HSC engineering studies. And we cover this at the end of term 1 as part of chapter 1. So what I'm expecting to do for task 4 is to draw these 4 drawings as orthogonal drawings. As third angle projections, and it specifies that all have to be dimensioned. That's the big difference we're adding here, is dimensioning, and it says you need to draw from the arrows shown. So in this case from A, there'll be your front view and the side view B. Now, if we look at the answers, so for this first one here, it's important that in this case B is shown to the left of the front view, so that the side view has to also be to the left. I think I've shown you some incorrect work that I've done in the past where I put it on the wrong side, and that's probably why my dimensions are here rather than there. I really should put my dimensions on the other side. So that's our first answer. I also am going to talk about the dimensioning standards in a second. So if we go through the second answer will look like this. So for our second block, this should be the second block. Here, the side view that we're looking at is the right side. So they're asking to look at the right side. Now, if you don't have the full dimensions to be able to draw this, I think some of them might actually be missing part of the dimension. You just can make a reasonable assumption. That's fine. You can scale it off the drawing or just make a reasonable assumption. The fourth drawing looks like this. Again, this is beware that we're looking at things from the left-hand side, so that the left-hand side view needs to go here. Now, it does ask us to label these, so I have labeled, but it also should say, like, the last thing is it should say identify the object, identify the drawing. So it really should say angle stop and dovetail template, which none of my drawings here have that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about I have all of these notes as part of my drawing puns at stands. Now, I always say that a bucket of KFC and your name on the Hall of Fame for the first person in each year who fills out these drawings. You know, I haven't had anyone claim them yet, but if we look at these standards here, I have a section of the Australian Standard, because the Australian Standard is a 200-page document. You don't need to see all of that. I have selected the pages I think are relevant, and they show how they do dimensioning. Now, there are different ways that we can do dimensioning. So, for instance, the arrows should be specified as 3 times longer than they are wide. These arrows can often be drawn as closed arrows. Typically, when you print them, we'll draw them as closed arrows. But when you draw your arrows, you can have them as open, but they should be 3 times longer than they are wide. So they should be 3 millimeters long and 1 millimeter wide. Now, the key thing I want to talk about here is that I must have cropped this when I moved this side over. Anyway, I've lost that dimension. Is that all of your dimensions must be drawn either above the line or to the left of the line. So you can see how this has been rotated. When it's rotated, it has to go on the left. And it's very, very tempting to write on the other side, but it must always be written to the left. So if I ever ask you to dimension something, I will be looking for people to see whether or not they have drawn their dimensions to the left. If they don't, they are going to lose marks. Now, in another video, I do talk about what are the standard offsets. So there should be a gap between the object that you're dimensioning, and there should be an extender which goes past the arrow just a little bit. I set those as 2 mil each, but they are specified in other places. The same as text is specified in various places. I want to point out here that an alternative that you are allowed to do is if you don't want to rotate your text 90 degrees, you are allowed to do that. For my drawings, I want it always to be drawn to the left and above the line or to the left of the line, so that I know that you know what to do. Anyone can draw their dimensions this way, and I'd rather you demonstrate to me that you can do the more difficult solution. Now, in terms of text size, that is specified, and I have gone into this in another video earlier. So they do specify how big the text is supposed to be in the Australian Standard here. We're going to come to that. Okay, so in this document, I've already recorded a 40-minute video where I talk about drawing standards. So I'm not going to try and repeat everything here. So this is preliminary or year 11 engineering studies, chapter 1, comms or communications. Now, the big thing is we need to be able to see a clear distinction between thick dark lines and thin dark lines. So we use thin dark lines for dimensioning, whereas our objects should be drawn in thicker dark lines. Now I've talked in this video, I talk about how we do that. We should use a mechanical pencil that's 0.5 millimeters for our thick dark lines, and our thin dark lines should be drawn with a sharpened HB pencil. The reality is I never did that when I was at school. I just used lighter lines. Now, because I was scanning these, you can't see a clear distinction between these lines. I pressed down pretty hard so you could see everything. But that's something worth noting. Aside from the fact that I'm missing this dimension here, I should be able to see a difference in the line thickness between these lines and your other lines. You are also allowed to draw construction lines, so you can see some construction lines that I've drawn, and that at least my construction lines are lighter. You don't need to erase your construction lines. They should be, theoretically, they should be drawn with a sharpened 2H pencil, but again, the reality is almost no one's going to do that. Your hidden detail should be drawn with thick dark lines as well, as they're specified. They are specified here. Line types are specified somewhere, I'm not sure. Here we go, line types. So thick dark lines for hidden detail lines. Okay, so I'm also going to talk about another document, which is I also talk about this in the other video, the VCE. So this is the Victorian Technical Drawing Specifications. I think this is a really good document. It talks about the different line types, the different line thicknesses here. It also talks about what line weights you should use. Now, I said that we should be using mechanical 0.5 pencils, but it's interesting to say that if you're printing these, if you're using CAD, we use a different standard for printed drawings. So it's important to chuck that out there. Like I said, if we go back to our drawing standards here, they do specify our thick dark line should be 3.3 millimeters. I'm saying that you should use a mechanical pencil as 0.5 if you're drawing in pencil. So this it goes through how the process of how you should get your lines by using a 45-degree line. I've demonstrated that on other videos, and I've talked about it in class. Now, in terms of dimensioning, I think it has really good dimensioning standards. It talks about the arrows, but this line here should be to the left, in my opinion. It should be written either through the line or rotated and to the left, like this. So this is how I want you to draw your dimensions, and anything you submit to me, it should be written either above the line or to the left of the line. Dimensioning circles is a bit more difficult. I don't think that's in this homework that I've set for you, so I'm not going to focus on that here. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is, I said I'd also go through the second task, isometric task 5, which makes up 20 drawings. It's a lot of drawings. I'm not expecting these to be drawn accurately or with instruments. I really expect you should not be spending more than 5 minutes. When I did my demonstration, I was drawing each of them in about 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds at most. I ideally would like you to spend 1 minute every day just doing your freehand isometric drawing, just to prove that you know how to produce these shapes. It's more an exercise in reading than it is an exercise in drawing. If you want to use a set square, that's fine, but try and set yourself a limit of 5 minutes. It should not take more than 5 minutes. So if you're taking 5 minutes for each of them, that's 100 minutes. It should not take you more than 2 hours to do all of this homework. Okay, so if we go, and I've done the first few. So this one was really easy for me to draw, the second one pretty easy, but I made a mistake. And the reason I made a mistake is I did not pay attention to where the arrow was looking from, and because of that, I drew this as it was flipped. It was the mirror image. So it's really important that you make sure that the arrow is what you would see if you were standing in the direction of that arrow. And I think people, because of video games and Google Maps and things like that, people have a much better sense of that than they maybe did 20 years ago. But let's keep going. So if we look at the third one, that's pretty much the same as this one, just a bit wider and a bit more detail. Now this one here, I started drawing on the board, and I'll say it, for a second I really was stumped. I had to think about it. And when I drew it up here, again, paying attention to the arrows, so thinking that this wide block, it should be where, so we can look at, we're looking at the wide block here. That's what we're looking at. We're standing in this arrow, and that's the part that is the front of our drawing. But once I started thinking about, okay, well, what does it look like as part of, I draw with my green lines, my construction lines, I just drew the block that the whole thing fit around. And once I drew that block, it was then easy for me to pick out, well, okay, I know what my top view has to fit in this space. And when I thought about drawing it in this space, I was able to draw the rest of the object. This one here, these two are sort of similar shapes, and they're both drawn from the same direction. So let's go back to the task. Okay, so in both cases, we have a long object here. This one's shown on the side, this one's shown in the middle. I did have to look, that's hidden detail, which when I was drawing, that was hard to see that that's in fact hidden detail. So we have a smaller object. But I didn't do any of this to scale, I just drew something quickly. But hopefully by seeing a few examples, that should be able to get you started and thinking for yourself about, well, okay, what does this object look like? You can see how that for a lot of these objects, I've drawn a box that I fit my shape into, and I think that that really helps. Okay, that will be it for today.